Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Kellan Fluckiger. And you had an NDE, you got sick while you were on a cruise, is that correct?
I did in 2018, 4 years ago this month.
Okay. Feel free to start wherever you like.
All right. So there's a little background about how this turned out to be quite special in my life, and that was I had a very successful career in executive, blah, 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 made a lot of money for a lot of years, but I struggled with depression and self-worth and sort of lived a dual life with shining on the outside and a mess behind the scenes. And that went on for decades, literally 35 years. And finally, when I was 52 in 2007, I had a divine intervention, not to be confused with the description I'm going to tell you of 4 years ago, that got me changed. And I left the industry and started life all over again. And part of that divine intervention was the introduction to the woman that I'm married to now in a incredibly dramatic, can't happen sort of way. And of course, her name is Joy, right? So she and I had been together for and I changed my life. I walked away from the industry, started over, and became a coach. So that's important just because it sets the stage for this thing that happened 4 years ago. So Joy and I had been building a coaching business. I began to write books. I'd written a whole bunch. Today I've written 16, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, in the process of building this coaching business, we had been very focused on a phrase that I use, add good to the world, like trying to do good, and probably because of the stuff that had happened before in my life, and we were really focused on that. So anyway, in 2018, we decided after 10 years of building this business that we have now, we decided to go on a cruise. Neither one of us had been on a cruise before, and so we went to the Baltic Sea, and it was fun. It was 10 days long, and on the way home, the last city was Oslo, and I got sick. And the fever got worse, and we flew to Amsterdam, and that was day 2, and the number of days will matter in a minute when you get a little further in the story. Monday was day 1 in Oslo, and number 2 was in Amsterdam, and we flew home, and I had a fever all the way home. And today, of course, if you were like that, they would throw you out the airplane window, but in those days, just gave you ice and towels on the way home because it was pre-COVID. Anyway, so we got home on Tuesday night, and I got sicker and sicker during the week, and I kept thinking, well, this is flu, it'll go away. And by Friday, which was day 5, I was sick. I went to the walk-in clinic, which is what they have here in Canada, and they wouldn't let me in. They took one look at me. In fact, they didn't even let me in the door. The nurse came out to look at me, and she said, you can't come in here, go to the ER. So I went, and you go to the emergency room, you might be an hour or 2 or 3, depending on how busy they are and everything, before they see you, the triage and then whatever. And I got in the emergency room, and in 10 minutes, I was in a private room. Well, I didn't even know they had private rooms in the ER. The only thing I'd ever seen were those curtain thingies, right? Where they separate the bed. So I'm in a private room, and in 10 more minutes, the doctor is in there. I'm like, ooh, this is not good. Like, here we are right now. So anyway, they started doing tests on me and trying to figure out what was wrong. And gradually, as the day wore on, news, x-rays and MRIs and the things came first, we're going to be at the hospital, and they came back and said, well, you have pneumonia. And then they came back and said, pneumonia in both lungs, but something else is wrong. And by this time, I'd sent Joy home because we had dogs and cats, and she had to do all that kind of stuff. And I said, well, they're going to admit me, so come back in the morning, Saturday morning, and we'll see where we're at. So she left, and then they kept coming back in, and pretty soon they said, well, we're going to take you to intensive care. Oh, okay. Not good. And then now it's getting late at night, 9 or 10 o'clock. And then they came back later, and a little while later, and said, we're not sure. You have horrifying pneumonia in both lungs, but something else is very, very wrong. And we're not sure what it is. So besides putting you in the ICU, we're going to put you in biological isolation, which is, for those that don't know, double door airlock, kind of like biohazard thing, right? Suit up. So anyway, I'm thinking, okay, this is not good. And then A little while later, they came in and said, ask the question you never want to be asked. The doctor came in and looked at me and said, do we have permission to intubate you and do anything we need to do to preserve your life? And I said, what? Okay. Yes. So after he left, and now it's coming on close to midnight, I went into meditation. I've been a meditation practitioner all my life. I started with martial arts when I was a teenager, and on and off. It's probably the only reason I lived through all the decades of depression. But anyway, in meditation, after I got into, meditation for a while, I could feel my body and spirit separating. It's kind of like a zipper opening, and I could feel something I'd never felt before, and I could feel that. So I came out of the meditation, I picked up my phone, and by this time I was trembling. I could feel my body collapsing, and so I picked up my phone, and I could barely operate it, but I sent a text to Joy that was 3 lines long. The first line said ICU, the second line said isolation/intubation, and the third line was I may be dying, because I knew I was. And she didn't see that because she'd gone to bed. And about 2:30 or 3 in the morning, she got the call from the hospital that you never want to get. And the nurse said to her, are you coming? And she said, what? And then she saw my text, right? So somewhere in that process, I crashed, code green, blue, red, pink, black, whatever it is in the hospital, and crash cart stuff, and my heart stopped. And so, and then from then on, I was in a coma for 17 days. But when my heart stopped, I came to, spiritually, in a horizontal position, like I was on the stretcher, but I was in a gray room. I couldn't really see the walls. I couldn't tell how big it was. I was very conscious and aware, but I was in a gray room. And I sat up, and I couldn't really see the floor or the ceiling, but everything was gray. And over my left shoulder, I could see a door. A doorway, actually. There wasn't a door in it, but there was a doorway over there. And I wanted to be at that door. And so all of a sudden, I'm standing at the door, and I'm leaning on the door jamb on my right shoulder. And my side of the door was gray. Like I said, it's kind of like that photo card gray, that sort of nondescript gray. And so I looked across the doorway, and the other side was white. And it wasn't streaming through. It was just white on that side and gray on my side. And I looked through the door, and on the other side of the door, leaning on the door jamb on that side, facing me, so it would have been on his right shoulder too, close enough to touch, was a person, and looked at me and asked a very simple question. One question. Looked at me and said, do you want to come home? And in a flash, who you're talking to, where you're at, what's going on, what the question means, and everything. Like there's no fogginess about any of it. And the question was just there in the air. There was no pressure. There was no expectation about anything. It was just needed an answer. There was a question. But what I would say at the end, there was no. In the coaching world, we talk about holding space, which means creating a container where people can talk. Well, in all the years I've ever heard of any of that, there's never been any space in any universe held like that felt right there. So we talked about it for a while, and I thought about all the stuff that had happened in the 10 years since the essentially divine intervention had got me sober and got me on the life that I was living now. That's why I told the other story. To start with, and all the people that I'd helped and what Joy and I had planned to do and everything else. And, we talked about what my sudden departure would mean for her and just all the stuff. And so after we talked about it for a while, I finally said, well, I'm not done. And he looked at me and he said, okay. And that was the end of the first conversation. I'm quite certain that that's when they were able to restart my heart. And that was the first of 3 conversations. The next day, and I'll save you asking me, how did you know it was the next day? You just know those kinds of things at that place. So The next day, I'm back at the door. Now, I'm still in a coma for another X weeks, but I'm back at the door, same place, same person, we're talking, and the question of the previous day didn't come up. That was decided. Okay, so what are you going to do? And so we talked about my coaching practice and my work to help people and adding good to the world and all the things I had been about in the 10 and a half, nearly 11 years since the first time, and what I had planned. And then I had an experience that, have you ever seen that Jodie Foster movie, Contact?
Yeah.
Well, that's the only thing I've ever seen that sort of creates a little bit of the sense of what it's like. It was a fire hose. I felt like if I hadn't been in a protective bubble of some kind, I would have been incinerated with the flow of information and vision and all this stuff for what felt like a very, very long time. And when I came back, or came to, not came to, but stopped that particular piece of it, standing at the door again, there were four things that were really, really, really clear that I got out of, that I could articulate at least out of the vision. And that was, number one, that we're all, every single one of us is a divine and intentional creation. And there's no question about that. That just simply is. Number two is we all were thoughtfully and carefully and intentionally given gifts and talents when we came here to this piece of experience. And number three, that we had a mission and purpose that we not only agreed to, but we were stoked about before we came. And number four, that all the help we need is available from both sides of that door. And I digested all that and I said, well, since that's true, and in some circumstances, when someone tells you something, you'd say, well, if that's true, but there in that conversation, you don't say if. Since that's true, why do we settle for crumbs? And I don't know if in the economy of heaven, brevity is a virtue, but the answer was 4 words. Because you don't believe. And I felt like I felt like, duh, I didn't say duh, but it felt like face palm, right? And I almost like hyperventilating with, oh my heck. So I said, well, what can I do? How can I help with that in the work that I'm doing and stuff? Oh, well, glad you asked. So then what came was a framework that I wrote in a second book called The Book of Context. And I wrote a book about this whole experience called Meeting God at the Door, Conversations, Choices, and Commitments of a Near-Death Experience. And I didn't write this piece of that conversation in that book because it's too much. So I wrote a companion book called The Book of Context. But anyway, an entire framework about how to change beliefs. So I asked the question, what can I do about helping people understand who they really are and change the beliefs they have that they can't this, can't that, aren't worthy, all that stuff. And so I was given a framework that I put in there that I use in coaching and stuff about how to change beliefs. So that was a long conversation between that thing and the questions and the framework and all that. It felt like a really, really long conversation. And then that was the end. And the third day, the third conversation, back at the door, and this time I felt like I was dancing, like I was buzzing. I was repeating to my learned, and if I felt like I was buzzing, zzz, kind of like that with all this stuff. We're back at the door, and he looked at me and he said, "This is just one question again. Are you sure?" And I felt again like I'd been punched. Not really, but I thought, what do you mean, am I sure? Am I stupid? Am I biting off more than I can chew? Am I missing something? Like what? Am I sure? What are you talking about? So we talked through all of the different ways that I could think about it. Am I missing something? Can I really do this? Is it everything I could think of? And when we got done, I finally said, okay, well, I'm sure. Okay. So that was the end. Nothing was said, but the conversation ended with a finality that I knew we were done. And Some 14 days now later, I came out of the coma in that biological isolation in the intensive care unit. Now, the reason that that was the experience itself, and since then I have the reason two or three things. One, the reason the 10 days or the days mattered, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until I collapsed, was that later the head of the infectious disease department at the University of Alberta told me and he told me, yeah, the 10-day mortality rate of what you had was 100%. And so, like, of course it killed you. That's what it does. It kills people. And
What was it?
it was a necrotizing MRSA in both my lungs and in the bloodstream. And it's extremely difficult to get. So it's a lot of like, where were you in Eastern Europe? Like, how did you get this? But it was MRSA, which is a, superbug kind of thing. And one of the things that I found out later was the first thing they did when they got me in there and put all that stuff in me, they put me on something they call the antibiotic of last resort. I didn't even know they had such a thing. I mean, there were like a whole bunch of things. And the bacteria was so aggressive that it attacked the tubing that was in my neck. And they had to pull it out of one side and put it in the other because it was attacking the plastic tubing in the neck. Anyway, so that's what I had. That's what happened. That was the conversation. When I came out of the coma after 17 days, I'd lost 35 pounds. I was so weak, I couldn't walk. I couldn't stand up. The first time I got out of bed, I had to hold myself upright, clutching a very heavy thing that looked like a tackling dummy on wheels so I could sort of shuffle it forward. And then there was quite a recovery and all the rest that's been there. And so I've written several books about all that, and that is the experience. It now governs everything that I do. My commitment for this year, 2022, is to help 10 million people discover, develop, and serve with their divine gifts. So that's all I do. I'm a coach. I have coaching clients all over the world, and I help people write books and do whatever they do to tell their stories and lots of things. But my fundamental mission is to help people figure out who they really are and to live into it.
Is that what you were pretty much doing before this?
It is, but it's renewed intensity. I didn't have the crystal clarity of focus. I was a coach. A coach is a person, like think of an athlete, tries to help the athlete get the most out of themselves, or a vocal coach. I sing also, and I've had a Hollywood A-list vocal coach working with me and for years. And to help you get the most out of yourself. So as a coach, I help, whoever, businesses and whoever, be the best version of themselves, get over the stories, get the nonsense out of the way, figure out. Now it's really more sharply focused. I'm committed to helping people who end addiction to mediocrity, stop living with the obvious and easy, and make choices about who they want to be. Things. And yeah, it's spiritual based, although I am a very practical person. I had my long career in energy was very, engineering, hardcore, this, that, and the other. And so it's not about, I can do the best quantum mechanics and vibrational conversations with the best of them. But that isn't really the focus. It's in the language of the person who needs help. Like, how do you translate the truths of the universe into a practical thing that person here now can use today and tomorrow in life to level up performance in business, relationships, or personal happiness.
Would you want to go into, I forget what you called it, like a spiritual experience that you had that changed you from your business into starting this coaching to begin with?
Yeah. You mean the divine intervention that happened in 2007?
Yeah.
Yeah, in order for that to make any sense, I have to paint the picture. So I was raised in a home that it was a two-parent home, looked pretty normal from the outside, but my mom got married young and she didn't really know much about, she was very religious, fanatic, and so she used discipline that today would be felony child abuse. We would have been removed from the home. And I remember a lot of beating and some sexual shaming and some other stuff too, but it would have been jail time today. But anyway, so in those days, it was just discipline. And I came away from I left home at 17. I came away from my upbringing with three truths. They weren't true, but they were true for me. I'm not good enough and I never will be. The entire purpose of the rest of my life needs to be proving to my mom that I'm okay and to get back in her approval, get the big stamp on my forehead. And number three, Kellan, it's all your fault, so you can't talk to anybody. Shrinks have no function except to take you away from God, so they're off limits. And so I lived completely isolated. I'd learned to be a really, really good liar as a kid to keep myself safe and to avoid some of the punishments, beatings that I got. And so I lived for 35 years, from 17 till I was 52, believing that I was the root of all evil, essentially. And at the same time, I was blessed with a lot of brains. So I knew how to make money. I created corporate success and made good money. And then I believed, well, I don't deserve this. So then I would sabotage it and have to change careers or cities. And then I would build it again and make a lot of money and then sabotage it and then build it again. And each time was higher. Like I've testified before Congress. I had a contract with the Queen of England. Just the list of things is like, are you kidding? And it was all so that I could burn it down. And on top of that, I went through 3 marriages. I was married and divorced 3 times. I didn't know how to be a partner. I was an addict. I was in and out of rehab. All a high functioning addict. I kept all that hidden. And so when this thing that just built over and over again until 2007, when this happened, I was at the height, making enough money that my $3,000 a week cocaine habit didn't matter. And that's, big on the outside and a complete battlefield disaster on the inside. I was single again for the 3rd time. I had 4 of my 10 children living with me. 3 were grown up and married. And I got home on a Friday night in August of 2007, and I was getting ready to go out and party for the weekend. And for some reason, I felt like I needed to turn on the television. Now, that doesn't sound like anything, except I didn't know how. I'd had the electronics store come in and put the biggest, whatever in, because that's what you buy, right? But I wasn't a TV watcher. So when I looked at it, I'm like, whoa, and I had to ask one of my kids, and my 16-year-old daughter came in and punched the buttons, threw the remote at me, and left. And it landed on a television program called Intervention, which I'd never heard of. But for those of you that don't know, it's a reality TV show about families who stage interventions for arrested loved ones. Well, the protagonist was a high-ranking executive. So I turned it off and I went and did some other stuff for a few minutes, and then I was going to go out, and I felt just compelled to turn the television on again. So, okay, this time I knew how, so I picked up the remote, turned it on, and that program started over. And no, I don't have a DVR, a recording device, and no, it wasn't on the schedule, and no, it can't do that. I understand, but it did. Freaked me out, so I thought, holy crap, I guess I'm supposed to watch this. So I sat down, and I watched the program, and it went badly. The guy refused help, yelled at his relatives, stomped out, and, it went really badly. But it scared me. I thought, crap. So I didn't go out. I went to bed. And when I went to bed, I went to hell. And what I mean by that is I went somewhere that felt out of body. I was in a big theater-looking place. It was dark. I could hear voices, and there were scenes playing out on the stage, and the scenes on the stage were all focused on suffering. And it started from my youth, all the suffering that had been inflicted on me as a little kid, up through all the suffering I had inflicted on everybody else as an addict and a bad partner and, all the things, just the whole focus. And I've never experienced the kind of suffering. We don't have the language to describe that intensity. And it went on for a long time. And finally, after witnessing this horrific set of scenes, a voice said, "It is enough." I woke up and the sun was shining in the window in my bedroom, which was weird because the windows faced west. And I got up and I realized it was 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon. So I'd been somewhere nearly 18 hours. I got up and realized that I'd been invited to change. I had no idea how to do this. I'd never talked to anyone. I had no idea where to start or what to do, but I knew we're done. It is enough. Okay. And I knew I had to quit and I was going to get away from everything, start all over again, but I didn't know what to do. So that was the first shoe of two, and it got me sober. Like I quit my cocaine habit that day, cold turkey, straight up, one day, $3,000 a week to nothing. Boom. And then I went back to work, kind of dazed, not knowing what to do on Monday. And in the position I had, because I made decisions that were important to a lot of companies, I used to get a lot of free stuff. People gave me free things because people wanted to be nice to Kellan, I guess. But anyway, not bribes, but, just free stuff, tickets and box seats to this and expensive bottles of booze, like I needed that. But, that kind of stuff, right? So one of the things I got was a pair of tickets to see a Yo-Yo Ma concert. And if you know who Yo-Yo Ma is in the classical world, in the classical world, he's a cellist. He's the best in the world, the best historically there's ever been. He's electrifying. And he can take over a whole auditorium all by himself. One dude down on the stage. He's that. But anyway, so I thought, it'd be a real shame to waste this other ticket because I was single again and I didn't have anybody to take. So I asked in the groups that I managed, I said, well, who likes classical music? And some lady in one of the groups said, well, I do. And I said, well, have I ever given you anything before? And she said, no. I said, okay, fine, see you there. So I gave her the ticket. We met at the venue. The concert was fantastic. And halfway through, and the seats were together, of course, but we didn't come together. Halfway through, this voice came to me that I recognized from 2 weeks earlier. And I got to remember, I'm 2 weeks stone cold sober at this point, right? This voice came and said, you need to marry this woman. And I said, you're insane. I said, I've screwed that up 3 times officially and with some other messes in between. Like, that is not happening. And so later that night, we were backstage because, of course, they were backstage passes also. And the voice came back and said, yeah, comma, and you need to tell her tonight. And I argued like crazy, like this, just, yeah, no. She can have me arrested. I mean, she works like, I don't even know if she has a boyfriend. Like, I can't do this. No, we're not doing this. I thought I knew she wasn't married, but I didn't know if she had a boyfriend. Anyway, you don't win those arguments. So I did. And it went about like you would have expected. Are you out of your mind? Like, what are you talking about? But the good news was she didn't call the cops.
What did you say?
I just told her that I had the impression that we were supposed to be together and that I knew that was what we needed to do. And I knew it sounded crazy, and I said, you know, I mean, everybody in the office knew I was a drug addict. They didn't know, but they knew, rumors and stuff, right? And I was such a high functioning addict that it didn't matter. I was doing the things I needed to do and got paid all that ridiculous amount of money. But anyway, so she told me I was crazy and she left. But in the next couple of weeks, she had her own set of experiences. And so 2 weeks later, after that, she quit her position of many years. She had a very nice career and a position, and I walked away from millions of dollars of contracts. And we walked off into the sunset, so to speak, not having any idea what we were going to do or how we were going to do anything. And about 6 months ago, we celebrated our 14th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
So the reason that's important is the first piece of that divine intervention. Thank you. The first piece got me sober, and the second piece, she was literally the angel that was sent to help me deal with 35 years of untreated, undiagnosed depression. She taught me how to be a person, how to be a friend, how to have a friend, how to tell the truth. She found me shrinks to talk to, and I've asked her 1,000 times, like, what on earth possessed you to just quit everything and walk off into the sunset with a drug addict? I said, like, what? She said, I don't know. I just knew to the core of my soul it was the right thing to do. So that's how it started 11 years before. And we'd been building stuff. I mean, we didn't even know each other. We had to get to know each other. You know, it wasn't all fun, sunshine, and roses, but we made a commitment. I mean, from the first minute, you know, if we're going to do this, I have no idea where this road goes, but we're doing it. And so in the motorcycle world, they say ride or die. So from the first day, it was ride or die, right? So when it was 11 years later and this other thing happened, it was, some people would say, I find such a thing frightening. To me, the second piece, 11 years later, was a blessing. It was a confirmation. It was a kindly expression that came in the midst of horrific illness that nearly killed me, of a precious thing.
Precious what?
I said a precious thing
Thing?
from the divine, a precious manifestation, as it will, from the divine to me, but also to us. So that was what happened 11 years earlier.
That's a beautiful love story.
It's you know, it doesn't even make any sense. Like, love had nothing to do with it. It does now, but it didn't then. It was like, do this thing. And, you know.
Sounds like God just blessed you.
You know, it was here's what I know. And I want your listeners to know this. The divine, one of the things that I said in the divine thing that happened in 2018, both sides of that door. But what I also know is that most of the time we ignore it. We ignore the yearnings, we ignore the feelings, the inspirations. And what I know is the interfaces with the divine always come in the form of invitation. Like, nobody made me. I could have gotten up. I had $1,000 worth of cocaine laying around when I got up from the first one. I could have thought I was crazy and gotten high. Instead, I threw that $1,000 worth of stuff away and said, I'm done. Like, it was an invitation. And my wife, and her name is Joy. Like, you can't make this stuff up, right? And so, you know, it was an invitation to her to do something completely insane.
It sounds like you both just trusted faith.
Yes. And accepted the invitation. And so what I want to give anyone who listens to this is two things. One, there's nothing special about me. In fact, if there was ever a candidate to be left at the bottom of the canyon, I would have been it. And what that tells me is there is no length to which
I'm sorry, it froze up. Hope it comes back. Sometimes this helps. I don't know why.
later, 15 years later nearly, yes, we built something incredible, but believe me, we built this by saying yes to that invitation.
Yeah. And it's ironic that you were watching Intervention on TV and had a divine intervention.
There's nothing ironic about it. I mean, the whole thing is like planned and it's so obvious. It's like, okay, you clearly can't do this on your own. Let me help you. Bang with the 2x4, and then Joy comes in. You clearly don't know how to do that either. Let me help you. That one, you know, and I would have been just as easy to say, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'll risk, you know, my career. I'll risk, you know, I just can't. I must be like something.
I think many of us that's had these experiences were abused children. And it just seems like we're just given a leg up. You know, like we're given some compassion, like we're in a state and we're just given that little extra thing that God knows will help us get there.
Yes, yes. So, number one, there's no length to which the divine will not go to invite you. And number two, It doesn't matter what's come before. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter who did what to whatever. You can live in the story that you can't. You're free to do that. But you can also start now and say, I'm done. I'm going to do something different. Even if you don't know what it is. I sure as heck didn't. Tendered my resignation and said, okay, now what?
Yeah. And that wasn't a sabotage this time. It was
No.
like the opposite. It was something for you.
Right.
So what do you do now? I mean, you have your coaching and you have your good
So
marriage.
I only do one
You have
thing.
10 children.
Well, yeah, the 10 children were before. Joy and I don't have any together, but we're working on those. Some of the 10 don't talk to me. I mean, they're still estranged, and there's lots of wonderful opportunity there. I don't view it as negative. I have infinite patience and absolute confidence that there will come a day. So I have no hesitation or anything about that. And I used to let all that just wreck me. It's my fault. I did this wrong. I did this wrong. I did this wrong. If only I'd whatever. That was horrific. That's one of the reasons I just finished a book, and it'll be out in about 2 weeks, called Forgiveness, A Journey of Courage to a Place of Freedom and Power. So what I do now is I write. I've written 16 books. I have 6 underway. I have that one and 2 more that are coming out this year. I compose music. And the reason I do is because I have stories to tell. So one of the books I wrote was Tightrope of Depression, my journey from darkness, despair, and death to light, love, and life. And I composed an album of 11 songs with this to tell those stories. And I didn't ever plan on writing a biography, and I didn't even think I was an author. I didn't write anything except technical papers during all those executive years, and I didn't start writing until after all that other stuff. And then I thought, well, what can I do to make this book more interesting? So I wrote 11 songs that tell the stories from that book. And that album's up. And then I realized as soon as I got done, the story's not over. I've told the story up to a certain place, and so I wrote the sequel called Down from the Gallows. And this has got an album of music, and there will be a concluding volume to the trilogy, and that's going to be out in March of next year, and that album is half done. So what do I do now? I write books. I help other people write books and tell their stories. I help people that are committed to ending addiction to mediocrity. I'm committed this year to help 10 million people discover and develop and serve at their divine gifts. I get to talk to beautiful people like you who are giving their hearts and souls to do the labor of love that is a podcast or a vodcast or whatever it is. You know, what you're doing is a labor of love. You've decided to add good to the world in a certain way. You've made a choice because of your experiences and your heart. And so I love people just like you who are making a choice to do something with their story and their struggle and everything else to add good to the world. So you're welcome. And I mean that honor absolutely, because I know what you're doing. I know how much work it takes. I know because I've done it and I do it with you. So I thank you for that.
Yeah. I think we carry that child abuse with us our whole life, but we can do it in different forms. You know, before it might have been depression or anxiety or self-sabotage or those kind of things. Or, you know, as we get older and we have these interventions or near-death experience, spiritual experiences, and we can see how we don't have to take the blame and shame for those, that we can help other people that are suffering. And because we know what it's like to suffer and nobody noticed, nobody care, or they hope you are suffering. And so you can take and make like art, like you're making art from your writings, from your music, from your coaching. I mean, we can turn that pain and suffering into art that we can share with the world. And I know you know what I'm talking about. I'm having trouble putting it in words, but that's just how I kind of express it. It's just like we can turn it into an art of whatever that looks like for anybody.
People ask me when I say things like, I'm going to help 10 million people discover, develop, and serve with their divine gifts, right? People ask all the time, well, I don't know what my gifts are. What are mine? How do I find them? And there's 3 things that I tell them. Look, number 1, the the first thing is look to your pain. And the reason is because whatever you have struggled through and fought with has created in you a specialized empathy that no one else has, with which you can do what you just said. That art that you create out of your life is the place where you can be the most service. So the first thing to do is look to your pain. The second thing to find your divine gifts is do it in the context of helping others. Like, how can I use the experiences of my life to serve? And that will help you find your divine gifts. And the third thing is in the name itself, divine gifts. Develop and cultivate a relationship with the divine so that you can ask and understand and get inspiration, intuition. So develop. I mean, divine gifts came from the divine, and you can have an intimate and close and connected relationship there, often driven by those hardships and struggles that you have struggled through and are now using to create the art that you so wonderfully described.
And sometimes we forget to just ask. Just to put it in words in a prayer, to ask whatever it is that you need, to state the problem and what you need, and ask God. I mean, even the other night, I just went to sleep and I was praying. It's like, God, I've been trying to get over this issue with my mother for my whole life. And I woke up the next morning from a dream that was so real. And the words in my head was, you are no one's daughter. And it might not make any sense to anybody else, but that freed me. I am no longer her daughter. I'm no longer my father's daughter. Like, that whole past is erased. I don't have to feel anything from that. I'm nobody's daughter. And that was freeing for me.
And those messages are so beautiful because they are so personal. And it's funny because I've said the same thing that you just said. I'll say something and I'll say, it may not mean anything to you, but blah, 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 right? And what you just said, because they are so tailored and so personal to you. And I can imagine what that might have meant to you, but I, of course, can't feel it the way you did. But I love the fact that you did it.
Finally cut. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was free.
You are. I love it.
Yeah.
So what else I don't know how long your episodes are, but what else would you like to know?
Did you send me any links, or can you send me some links I can add to your description? So your books or your website or?
Yes, here's what I can do. The gal that got a hold of you, Angel, is my podcast and everything gal. And so she has all that. I'd be just happy. I'll send her a reminder. So all that stuff. But here's the easy way for your listeners. The easy way is when you have a name like Kellan Fluckiger, you can't hide. So if you tell me you can't find me, I know, 1, you're not looking, or 2, you're lying, or 3, you're spelling my name wrong. Because if you spell my name right, I can't hide. Facebook, Amazon, books, Spotify, music, LinkedIn, Google, go on and on. Like, I can't hide.
All right. Well, I'll make sure and spell your name right so they can find you. And I'll have this out this evening and send it to you in email as soon as it's ready. So if I get her the links later, I'll just go back in later and add them.
Okay, great. I will remind her to do that. She has a whole package of stuff that she does. Angel Adriano is her name, and she's the one that delightfully connected us. And I'm so grateful to be here with you today.
Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing your story. And tell Joy I said hello. And
I will do that.
You guys have a wonderful life.
You too. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.